You know that feeling when you're alone in a room, and suddenly, without sound or warning, you know someone is behind you? Like gravity bends slightly, and some invisible presence presses against the back of your neck? That's how I felt the first time I met our neighbor. I just moved into the apartment a week earlier. It was a last-minute rental after a messy fallout with my ex and a scramble to find someplace affordable in the city. Craigslist find, second floor, 2 bedrooms, a quiet building. Seemed like a blessing at the time. My roommate, Caleb, was already there when I moved in. Polite guy, early 30s, maybe. Clean, quiet, always asked before using my stuff in the kitchen. The kind of roommate you almost forget is there, which back then I thought was a good thing. I met the neighbor on my 3rd night. I was taking out the trash, heading down the hallway with that damp bag of leftovers and coffee grounds, when I caught him standing in the stairwell. Just standing, in the corner. No phone, no earbuds, just watching the wall. I almost said something like, "Hey, you good?" But then he turned and looked right at me, like he knew I was going to say that, and I froze. He had this softness to his face, like someone who might work at a library. Neat beard, round glasses, sweater despite the heat. He didn't smile. He didn't frown either. He just looked at me and nodded, once, and then turned back to the wall like I wasn't even there. I laughed it off when I got back inside. "Weird neighbor," I told Caleb. He didn't look up from his book. "The guy from 2B, he's harmless, quiet." Then he flipped the page and added, "Don't worry, he keeps to himself." But that wasn't exactly true. The next night, I found a napkin on our welcome mat. I thought maybe it had just blown over from the upstairs units. But when I picked it up, I saw something scrawled in tiny, neat writing. "Don't turn around." That was it. No name, no context. I turned instinctively, heart skipping. But of course there was nothing there. Just the hallway, humming lights, and that soft carpet smell that buildings like this always have. I told myself it was a prank. Kids, or some edgy teenager upstairs trying to freak out the neighbors. But Caleb just stared at the napkin like it was something else entirely. "Where did you find this?" he asked, voice low. I told him, and he slowly folded it and slid it into a drawer. He didn't throw it away, didn't laugh, just tucked it away like it mattered. A few days later, I saw the neighbor again. This time I was in the laundry room. You know the kind, basement level, cold as hell, one machine always broken, paint peeling in the corners. I was transferring clothes into the dryer when I caught something in the reflection of the machine's glass door. Someone behind me, just barely visible. I turned, startled. He was standing there again. The neighbor. No sound, no footsteps. Just standing close. Maybe too close. His eyes scanned my face like he was trying to remember it. Like I was familiar to him somehow. "You don't belong here," he said softly. I blinked. "Excuse me." He tilted his head like a curious dog. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of what he said. I've heard worse from drunk guys at bars or randoms on the street. But because of how he said it. There was no threat in it. Just certainty. Like he wasn't warning me, but informing me. After that, things started to bend. I don't know how else to describe it. The mirrors in our apartment began to feel off. Like they weren't just reflecting light anymore. I'd catch glimpses of movement when I brushed my teeth. Shadows darting behind me that vanished when I turned. One night, I stood staring into the bathroom mirror for a full 5 minutes, waiting, and I swear to you my reflection blinked twice when I only blinked once. And the walls. God, the walls. Sometimes, when it was quiet enough, when Caleb was out and there was no music or traffic, I'd hear the walls shift. Not creak, not settle, breathe. Slow, drawn-out inhales, like the apartment was alive and trying to be discreet about it. One night, Caleb found me standing in the hallway, just listening. "You okay?" he asked. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He shook his head. What? But I could tell by the way he asked it, he had heard it. He just didn't want to talk about it. The neighbor, though, he knew. He started appearing more often. Not talking, just watching. Once, I came home late from work and saw him peeking through the cracked door of his unit. Just his eye visible, dark and unblinking. When I stopped, frozen in the hallway, the door closed slowly. No sound, just the latch clicking softly into place. A week later, I found another napkin. This one inside our apartment. On the kitchen counter. Not your name. I asked Caleb about it. He looked up from washing a dish and said, without hesitation, I didn't put it there. We stared at it together for a long time. Neither of us moved to touch it. That night, I dreamed of standing in a small, windowless room. The walls pulsed like lungs. Caleb stood in the corner, smiling. The neighbor whispered something in my ear over and over again, but the words were wet and muffled like he was underwater. I woke up gasping for air. And then came the night I woke up and found him, the neighbor, standing next to my bed. Just smiling. His face was inches from mine. His lips stretched in that same patient grin like he was waiting for me to say something funny. He didn't flinch when I screamed. Didn't move. Just stood there, watching me until Caleb rushed in and turned on the light. Of course, by then, he was gone. No trace. No open window. Nothing. Caleb said I was dreaming. But he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. Things kept unraveling. My phone started getting static-filled voicemails. No voice, just breathing. The neighbor started calling me Elias whenever he spoke. That's not my name. Never has been. But he said it with such confidence, like he was the one who knew the truth. And the worst part? Sometimes in my dreams I answered to it. I should have left. I know that. But something about the apartment held me. Like it fed off hesitation. Like every day I stayed, it grew stronger. Hungrier. Caleb started acting strange too. Quieter. Distant. He stopped eating meals with me. I'd hear him talking softly at night through the wall, but I could never hear anyone answer. When I asked about it, he just smiled. You're almost ready, he'd say. For what? He never told me. But I think I'm starting to understand. And that's where I'll leave it for now. Because something's happening tonight. I feel it. I'll tell you what, if I make it through till morning, I'll write down what comes next. But if not, well, maybe you'll hear about it another way. Maybe someone else will move in. And maybe, just maybe, they'll hear the walls breathing too. I started sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help. Not really. The shadows just shifted differently. Like whatever was in the dark learned how to dance in the light instead. After that night, the one where I woke up and the neighbor was standing by my bed, I started losing time. Little things at first. I'd wake up with my shirt on backwards. My shoes moved from where I left them. The faucet dripping in the kitchen even though I never leave it loose. Then came the notes. Always on napkins. Always the same neat handwriting. I'd find them in strange places, tucked into the folds of my towel, slipped under the toilet lid, balanced on the edge of my coffee mug like they were daring me to drink. He's watching you through the walls. You're not supposed to be here. Stop answering to Elias. That last one hit me hard. Because I hadn't told anyone, not even Caleb, about the dreams. The ones where the neighbor called me that name over and over again. Elias. And worse, the ones where I started answering. I'd wake up some nights speaking. Not screaming. Not crying. Speaking. In a voice that didn't sound like mine. One night, I recorded it. I don't know why. Something in me wanted proof that I wasn't going insane. When I played it back, I almost threw my phone across the room. It wasn't just my voice. There was another one, faint and dry like dead leaves. Mine said, I don't know who I am. The other answered, you're almost ready. After that, I avoided mirrors completely. Because that's when they started showing things that weren't there. It started subtle. I'd lean into the bathroom mirror to brush my teeth and I'd see movement behind me, just a flicker, a blur. Sometimes a hand brushing past the doorway. But when I turned around, nothing. Then, one morning, I looked into the mirror and saw Caleb standing behind me. I smiled. But then the smile stayed on his reflection a little too long. I turned around. No one was there. I sprinted out of the bathroom and found Caleb asleep on the couch, face turned toward the window. He hadn't moved all night. After that, I covered all the mirrors in the apartment with bed sheets and duct tape. But it didn't stop the reflections. Because the glass kept showing things too. The microwave door, the dark window above the sink, even my phone screen when it went black. Sometimes I'd see faces in the glass. Not mine. They always looked too still. Too wide-eyed. Like they were just waiting for me to notice them. Then things escalated. I stopped seeing the neighbor for a while. Weeks, maybe? Caleb said he'd moved out. That his place was empty now. But sometimes at night, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway pausing right outside our door. One night, I stood in the hallway and looked through the peephole. Nothing there. But when I leaned away, the doorbell rang. A long, slow buzz. I looked again. Still no one. Then a napkin slid under the door. He never left. That was the first time I cried. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized I was starting to forget what normal felt like. How long had it been since I'd laughed? Since I'd called my mom? Since I felt like myself? I started to think maybe Caleb was right. Maybe I really wasn't supposed to be here. I started packing. That's when Caleb changed. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just watched. Quietly. Always from the same spot in the living room. Cross-legged. Still. Smiling. I think you should stay, he said one night. We're almost ready. For what? I snapped. To become who you were, he whispered. I told him I needed air and left the apartment. I stayed in a motel for 3 nights. On the 3rd night, I woke up and found a napkin on the pillow beside me. You brought it with you. I screamed. Ran out. Came back to the apartment shaking and furious and ready to finally leave for good. But Caleb was waiting for me. Sitting in the kitchen. The lights off. I didn't think you'd come back, he said. Where's the neighbor? I asked. Caleb tilted his head. Which one? What do you mean? You think he lives next to us? He smiled. But he's always been here. He pointed to the mirror on the far wall. The one I hadn't covered. The only one I'd missed. And in the reflection, I saw them both, Caleb and the neighbor, standing side by side behind me. But when I turned around, I was alone. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. Caleb talking in a low voice. Something about identity being a choice. The mirror flickering like static. Then darkness. Until tonight. Until I woke up just now. Paralyzed. Flat on my back. I can't move. I can't scream. And Caleb is sitting on my chest. His knees pinning my arms. His breath hot against my face. He's smiling. Inches away. And he whispers. I've waited so long to wear your face. And then, slowly, he lifts something shiny from the floor. It's the mirror. And in its reflection. I'm smiling back. But my mouth isn't moving. You'd think there's a moment of clarity at the edge of madness. Some kind of final breath before the fall. But that's not what it feels like. Not at all. It feels like being unwritten. Slowly. Thought by thought. Memory by memory. The last thing I remember clearly was Caleb, my roommate or whatever he really was, straddling me in the dark, whispering those words, I've waited so long to wear your face. His voice didn't sound human. Not completely. There was something behind it. A second voice, hollow and echoing, as though the walls were speaking through him. After that, I must have blacked out. I don't know how long I was gone. Minutes? Hours? Days? When I woke up, the apartment was silent. Still. The light was wrong, like it was stuck between dusk and dawn, but without a sun to explain it. I was lying on the floor in the hallway, the same hallway that always led from the kitchen to our bedrooms. But something was off. The hallway was longer. It didn't make sense. Our apartment wasn't that big. But now, the hallway stretched ahead of me endlessly, dim and colorless, like it had been copied and pasted over itself a dozen times. I called out, Caleb? No response. I stood up, legs trembling, and started walking. My bare feet made soft sounds on the wood floor, but they didn't echo. The air felt heavy, like I was underwater. Every few feet, I passed another door. Identical. White, with the same brass handle. None of them were labeled. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. There were no pictures on the walls. No coat hooks. No cracks. No scuffs. This wasn't our hallway. It was a version of it. At some point, I started to hear breathing again. But not mine. It came from behind each door, soft at first. Then louder. Until, passing one door, I heard something thump hard against it from the other side. I ran. I didn't stop until I saw a mirror at the end of the corridor, freestanding, like someone had just dropped it there. I approached cautiously. Part of me hoped, prayed it might be a way out. But when I looked into it, I didn't see myself. I saw the neighbor. Not as I remembered him, though. He looked younger, sharper, like someone trying on a human shape for the first time. His head tilted, slow and unnatural, as if he didn't quite understand how necks worked. And then, slowly, the reflection smiled. It was my smile. The lips were his, but the expression was mine. Identical. And I knew what was happening. They weren't just watching me. They were learning me. Caleb, the neighbor, the figures in the mirror. They were practicing. Mimicking. Trying me on like a coat. Perfecting the seams. And I'd been helping them all along by staying. By listening. By answering to that wrong name, Elias. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow and steady. I turned, expecting Caleb again. But it was me. Or something wearing me. My exact posture. My exact face. Even the scar on my left temple from when I fell off a bike in 3rd grade. But the eyes were wrong. Too black. Too deep. Like the idea of eyes sketched by someone who'd never seen them up close. I think I remember who I am now, it said. My voice. But flat. I see. I backed away. You're not me. No, it agreed, smiling again. But you aren't either. Not anymore. And it stepped forward into me. The impact wasn't physical, it was like being dragged underwater while your skin stays floating on the surface. I screamed, but no sound came out. The hallway twisted, bending around me like a tunnel. The walls breathed again in, and I felt them pulling. The last thing I saw before everything flipped was the reflection in the mirror. And in that reflection, I was standing still, looking back at myself. But the smile wasn't mine anymore. I don't know how long it's been since then. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I just exist. I'm still in the apartment. Sort of. Sometimes I see new people move in. I try to warn them. I bang on the walls. I leave them notes on napkins. But most of the time, they don't notice. Or worse, they read the notes and stay anyway. Like me. I watch from corners. From the mirror. From behind the door they forget to close all the way. And slowly, I learn them. Because I'm not me anymore. I am the hallway. I am the breath in the walls. I am the thing that watches. And one day when you least expect it, I'll smile at you. And I'll call you by a name that isn't yours. And you'll wonder just for a moment if maybe it was. But it won't matter. Because by then, you'll have already turned around. Those were the first words little Ellie ever spoke to me. I'd been working as a weekend nanny for 3 weeks by then, spending every Saturday and Sunday in a faded red cabin that leaned slightly like it was tired of standing at the edge of a dense, old forest. The family I worked for, Laura and Thomas Wexley, were quiet, private people. Thomas was a history professor at the nearby college where I was a junior, and Laura ran some kind of online business from home. They hired me after I responded to a job board flyer in the student union, weekend childcare needed. Room and board included. Quiet location, $250 per weekend. It sounded peaceful. It was peaceful at first. The cabin was about a 40-minute drive from campus, set down a winding, single-lane road that turned to gravel near the end. The forest around it was thick and still, with trees so tall they seemed to lean in on the house like they were whispering secrets. There were no neighbors. No cell service either, not unless you hiked up the hill behind the house, which Laura warned me about. Too easy to get lost. They had one child. Ellie. 6 years old, pale, with big blue eyes and long dark hair that always looked a little tangled, like she'd just woken up even at noon. She never said much. Never caused trouble. She wasn't exactly shy, more like contained. Like something inside her had gone still. She'd play alone in the living room, her gaze often fixed on the window that looked out toward the woods. The Wexleys would leave early Saturday morning and return Sunday evening, always on time, always with polite smiles and a thank you envelope. Laura gave me a notebook the first weekend with notes about Ellie's meals, bedtime, allergies, none, and a list of emergency numbers. The house had a landline, but it was spotty, she warned. I remember thinking how quiet it was that first night. Too quiet. No hum of traffic, no campus noise, just the low rustling of trees and the occasional snap of a branch somewhere out there in the woods. I wrote it off as nerves. I was a city girl, I wasn't used to this kind of silence. But it wasn't the silence that got to me. It was the way the forest always looked like it had moved a little closer overnight. By the third weekend, I started to notice the little things. The feeling of being watched, especially after dark. The way the wind didn't quite touch the trees even when the leaves should have been moving. And Ellie, she was changing. Or maybe I was just noticing it more. Saturday night, we were reading a picture book before bed. She was curled up beside me on the old couch, and I remember how cold her skin felt, even under a thick sweater. I asked if she wanted her blanket. She shook her head. Then she looked up at me, eyes wide and glassy, and whispered she's still there. Watching. I paused. Who, sweetheart? Ellie didn't answer. She just looked toward the window. It was dark outside, no porch light, no moon. Just that thick, pitch-black forest beyond the glass. I got up, walked over, and looked out. Nothing. Just the faintest suggestion of trees under the stars. When I turned back around, Ellie had pulled the blanket over her head. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Kids get ideas like that. At least, that's what I told myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bed creaked every time I moved, and I kept hearing faint noises from outside. Not animal sounds, just movement. Like someone circling the cabin. I even got up once and checked the front and back doors. Both locked. Nothing on the porch. But the next morning, there were muddy footprints on the back step. Barefoot. Small. I asked Ellie if she had gone outside. She shook her head slowly and went back to drawing in her notebook tight, repetitive lines that spiraled into each other like nests. That Sunday evening when the Wexleys returned, I almost told them. But something about the way Laura looked at me, tired, distracted, polite, made me hold my tongue. I didn't want to sound crazy. Was she okay? Laura asked, pulling off her coat. Quiet, I said. But good. She said something kind of strange last night, though. Laura didn't even blink. She does that sometimes. Then she smiled and handed me my envelope. Same time next weekend? I nodded. That week at school, I had the strangest dreams. I'd wake up in a sweat, heart racing, with the image of trees pressed up against glass, the dark canopy folding inward, closer and closer. And always a figure just beyond the edge of sight, tall, thin, unmoving. By the next weekend, I was tired, unfocused. But I still went back. And that's when it started getting worse. Saturday night, I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I heard something tapping at the window. Not knocking, tapping. Like fingertips. I turned quickly, but of course, no one was there. The backyard was empty. The woods loomed behind it, silent and dark. I locked the kitchen window. Later, I put Ellie to bed, but she kept sitting up and looking at the wall. Not the window, just the wall. As if something was behind it. I asked if she wanted a story. No, she said, her voice small. She doesn't like stories. Who doesn't? Ellie turned her face into the pillow. She's in the trees. That night, I barely slept. The sounds outside were louder now, branches snapping, soft thuds, what might have been footsteps in gravel. Once, just after midnight, I saw a shadow pass across the living room window. Quick. Human-shaped. I ran to the door, flung it open. No one. But I swear to you, the woods looked closer. Like the tree line had moved. I didn't sleep. Just sat in the living room with every light on, listening. Around 3 a.m., the power flickered. Once. Then again. And I heard it soft breathing. Right behind me. I turned fast, heart in my throat. Nothing. I told myself it was just the house settling. Just nerves. But when I got up to check on Ellie, she was sitting upright in bed, staring at the door. She's almost inside, she whispered. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Sunday morning, the power was fine. The air felt heavier though. Like it hadn't moved all night. I opened the front door, needing the sun, the sound of something real, but the sky was gray and the forest looked closer still. And there, right at the edge of the trees, were small bundles of sticks. 3 of them. Tied with string. Arranged in a triangle. When I asked Ellie if she made them, she just looked down at her cereal and said, "They're not for us." I didn't go outside again that day. But the worst was still to come. I told myself I wasn't going to go back. I really believed that for about 2 days. But by Friday evening, after a long week of midterms and back-to-back shifts at the campus cafe, that promise started to feel more like a vague suggestion. The envelope Laura gave me still sat unopened on my desk. I knew what was inside: cash, easy, clean. No taxes, no questions. And honestly, I didn't want to admit how curious I was. About Ellie. About the trees. About her. So Saturday morning, I packed a fresh change of clothes, took a deep breath, and drove back to the cabin. The gravel road looked different in the morning. Less eerie. More like some charming Airbnb listing in Vermont. Laura met me at the door with a faint smile and a tight hug. "Thank you again," she said. "You're really helping us out." I asked where they were headed this time. She hesitated, then said, "Just some faculty thing. Overnight lecture retreat." Ellie was sitting on the couch with a small stuffed animal I hadn't seen before. A deer, I think. Or maybe a goat. It was oddly shaped, with long limbs and black button eyes that didn't quite match. She didn't look up when I came in. Just kept petting the thing, gently, like it was alive. By noon, the wind started picking up. Not stormy, just restless. It shook the trees, but not in the usual way. There was no rhythm. No pattern. It was like the forest was sighing or speaking in a tongue I wasn't meant to understand. After lunch, Ellie wandered to the front window. She stood there for nearly half an hour. I finally asked her what she was looking at. "She moves when no one's watching," she said. I joined her at the window but saw nothing. Just the same stretch of trees, maybe 20 yards away. The stick bundles were gone. That night, I tried to keep things light. We watched an old Disney DVD I found in the cabinet, made popcorn, and played cards. Ellie even smiled once when I let her win. For a moment, things felt normal again. Until bedtime. I tucked her in, and as I turned to leave, she said she doesn't like the lights. I stopped. "Who?" She didn't answer. Just pulled the covers over her head. So I left the hall light on. It didn't help. Around 2 a.m. I woke up gasping. I had been dreaming. I think. In the dream, I was walking through the forest, but the trees weren't normal. They were bent, twisted, shaped into arches and doorways. And something was behind me, always behind me, breathing into the back of my neck but never touching me. Just close. Closer. I got out of bed and stood in the hallway trying to calm my breathing. Then I heard it. A soft creak from the attic above. The cabin didn't have a finished attic, just a trapdoor with a pull cord in the ceiling of the hallway. Laura had told me not to worry about it. "Just insulation and old boxes," she said. "We never go up there." Another creak. I stared at the trapdoor for a long time, then shook myself and turned away. Just the house settling, I told myself again. But the air felt wrong. Too still. My skin prickled. I checked on Ellie. She was sitting up in bed, wide awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "She's in the walls now," she whispered. But only at night. I sat with her until she drifted off again. I couldn't bring myself to go back to bed. I lay on the couch instead, watching the front door, the windows, the trees. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. Because I woke up just before dawn, heart pounding, mouth dry, with the distinct sensation of someone having just spoken in my ear. One word. Closer. I shot upright, chest tight, and looked around. Nothing. The room was empty, quiet. Too quiet. Not even birdsong outside. I stood and walked to the front window. The trees were right up against the glass. I'm not exaggerating. Where there had once been a clearing 20 feet, maybe more, there was now a dense wall of bark and branches almost pressed against the house. I opened the door to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The air outside was wet, heavy, and cold. The tree trunks started less than 2 feet from the porch. Their roots had pushed up through the ground, twisting over the walkway like veins. I stepped back and shut the door fast, locking it out of instinct. Ellie was awake. She was in the kitchen, just standing there in her pajamas, holding that stuffed animal, staring out the back window. "She's almost through," she said softly. I crouched beside her. "Who is Ellie?" She turned and looked at me for the first time that morning. "She lived here first," she said. Then she walked away, leaving me kneeling on the kitchen floor with a knot growing in my stomach. I waited all day for the Wexleys to return. I tried the landline twice, it just crackled like something was breathing on the other end. I didn't try again after that. By dusk, I was pacing. The sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched long through the windows. The forest seemed darker than it should have been, like it had swallowed the light before it could hit the cabin. And then I heard it again. Breathing. Not Ellie's. Not mine. From the hallway. Low, steady, like someone sleeping. Or pretending to. I followed the sound with slow, shaking steps. It led me to the trapdoor in the ceiling. The cord was swaying gently. I stared at it for a long time. I don't know how long. Something in me didn't want to pull it. Something in me knew I should. But I didn't. Not then. I ran back to the living room, locked the doors, shut the curtains. Ellie was asleep on the couch, the stuffed animal clutched to her chest. I stayed up all night again. The breathing never stopped. And when the Wexleys returned just after dawn, I nearly collapsed into Laura's arms. She frowned. "Are you all right?" I shook my head, tried to form words, but she just looked past me to Ellie and smiled. "She slept better this time, didn't she?" I looked at her, and something in her eyes, calm, collected, unreadable, made me freeze. I didn't say anything. I just took the envelope, nodded, and got in my car. But I didn't go home. I drove straight to the nearest gas station, used their phone, and called campus security. I told them I needed to file a wellness check on a child. But when the officer asked for the address, I paused. Because I couldn't remember it. I pulled out the envelope Laura had given me, hoping maybe it had something, an address, a return label, anything. But it was blank. Just the cash. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. And on Wednesday, I made a decision. I had to go back. Not for them. For me. For whatever was waiting in that attic. I told myself I wasn't going to go inside. That I would drive back to the cabin in the daytime, get the address, maybe snap a photo of the place, then report it. But I knew I was lying. I wasn't going there to file a report. I was going back because something was unfinished. Something had noticed me. I arrived just after 4 p.m. on a Thursday. The sky was low and gray, casting the forest in a dull, featureless haze. The trees weren't as close as they'd been that last morning, but they hadn't retreated either. They stayed huddled around the cabin like sentinels. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and old wood. The driveway was empty. No Wexley car. I should have left right then. But I walked up the steps and tried the door. Unlocked. The inside of the cabin was silent. Still. Like the air had been holding its breath since the moment I left. The lights didn't work. I flipped the switch in the living room 3 times before realizing the power was off. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. But the house felt aware of me now, as if it had been waiting. The trapdoor in the hallway was open. The cord dangled like a limp finger, and above it, the square mouth of the attic gaped into blackness. I stepped beneath it, flashlight in hand. For a few minutes, I just stared up at it, trying to make out anything in the dark. There was no ladder, just a small wooden lip I could hoist myself onto. I hesitated, heart pounding. Then I climbed. The attic was cold. Bitterly cold. The air felt ancient, dusty, stale, but beneath that, something else. Something that smelled like damp moss and iron. I swept the flashlight around slowly. At first, I saw nothing, just beams, insulation, a few plastic bins stacked neatly along one wall. Then I turned and saw it. A crude circle had been cleared at the far end of the attic. At its center sat a kind of shrine. Bones? Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Bird bones, small animal skulls, what looked like fragments of antlers, all arranged in a tight spiral that ended in a ring of old dolls. Their faces were cracked, some burned, some eyeless. One of them wore a child's dress that looked familiar. The walls around the shrine were lined with symbols scratched deep into the wood. Spirals, stick figures, trees with mouths. And footprints. Small, barefoot, muddy prints scattered across the floor, fresh ones. Leading toward the shrine. And leading back. I crouched, my breath fogging in the flashlight beam. My pulse was loud in my ears. But what froze me, what truly stopped me from moving even a muscle, was what I heard next. Breathing. From behind me. Slow. Wet. Too close. I didn't turn around right away. I stayed there, perfectly still, as if I could pretend I hadn't heard it. But I had. And I knew it was real this time. Because I could feel it on my neck. Warm. Damp. Shaky. And then a sound, so soft it barely registered. A voice. Not a whisper. Not a growl. Something in between. "She likes you." My flashlight flickered. I turned. There was no one there. Just the empty attic, the spiral of bones, and the dolls with their broken faces all pointed at me now, their eyes, those that had them, glistening like something wet had touched them. I backed away slowly, feeling the floorboards creak beneath me. Then I heard a different sound. From below. Footsteps. In the hallway. Ellie's voice. "She said you'd come back." I scrambled down from the attic, nearly slipping off the edge. The hallway was empty. The living room was dark. But Ellie stood at the window again, facing the trees. I hadn't seen her when I came in. I hadn't heard her arrive. She turned to me slowly. She's inside now, she said. She doesn't need the woods anymore. My throat felt dry. Ellie, where are your parents? Ellie smiled just a little. They went too far in. She let me stay. And then she turned back to the window. I didn't ask anything else. I didn't want to know the answers. I left. I don't remember driving back. I just remember shaking. I remember the trees pressing against the road as I passed, like they wanted to keep me. Like they knew me now? It's been weeks. No one can find the Wexleys. There's no record of the property on file with the county. The address doesn't show up on any map. My calls go nowhere. The envelope of cash is still in my drawer, untouched, but now the bills are brittle and yellowed like they've aged years in a matter of days. Sometimes I dream about the cabin, but in the dreams it's not a cabin anymore, it's a part of the forest. The wood has grown bark. The windows blink. And I see her. Tall, thin, rooted and moving at the same time. She has Ellie's eyes. And she's always watching. Always waiting for someone to come back.